Salve, salve, maestro here, and today we're gonna be reading our first dev diary. Yes, exactly. We're gonna be reading the dev diary not only from Wiki3, but also from EU5 and hopefully also playing it when it launch. And in this dev diary, we're gonna discuss the trade rework, the world market. So trade was something that needed to be rebuilt and rethinked, and step by step, as all the other Paradox games, Victoria 3 is becoming a actual game. So let's just hope that it improves not only the quality of it, but also the performance, because probably Victoria 3 is the only game that most of people want to go up until the late game. So let's start it. Happy Thursday and welcome back. After an extended hiatus, we are now returning to regularly scheduled development diaries. Okay, let's jump. We're focusing completely on trade with a free update. So they are not happy with trade, the same as us, and it only became worse with the 1.5 and Matthew. Okay, now they are gonna restart it from scratch. Let's see the outcome of it. Enter the world market. Those of you familiar with Victoria 2 will immediately recognize the name and might even have assumed from the title of this diary that we are replacing the national market system in Victoria 3 with the global one in its predecessor. Actually, that's exactly what I thought. Not exactly. I actually thought that you would try to first sell the items to the national demand and then all the surplus would go to this so-called world market. But let's see what they got first. The world market in Victoria 3 is not where pops and buildings buy and sell goods, but rather where autonomous trade takes places. And every good traded in the world market has a working market price based on its amount of export versus import, which makes sense. You can think of it as an existing at the top layer above the national market, though this is not completely accurate picture as you should soon understand. So then, how does trade with the world market work? As with the old trade route system, trade centers are still the principal drivers of trade, but the way you interact with them has been turned on its head. Instead of being a build that appears after trade is created, you now build trade centers to create trade capacity in states, which allow those states to trade with the world market. I kind of like it, the old system where like the trade center would just pop up because it felt natural to me. In my experience, it seemed that trade centers would be created in different places, so I thought it was cool. But if the trade centers can be built by private ownership, it probably means that it will feel even more natural, so nice. Each trade capacity allows for a certain quantity of a good to be imported or exported. Imported goods are purchased from the world market and sold in the state, and so they are profitable where the goods are cheaper in the world market than in the state, with the opposite being true for exports. If I'm not mistaken, the system nowadays is state to state, right? So if it's cheap in California and expensive in Beijing, the trade between California and Beijing would be profitable. But now it's referred to the world market price. Okay, cool. There is a bit more of this, which we'll get into when we talk about trade advantage. But the key thing to remember is that trade uses local state price, which means it no longer suffers from inherent inefficiency of the old system, which was always penalized by mapping. It also means that the location of trade centers matter. It's more profitable to import luxury clothes into a state with a large number of wealthy pop, as an example. And it could also have some state trades advantage. So, like, there are some states like New York, I think the home counties, they have a natural harbor state trade, which doesn't make a lot of effect, in my opinion. But now it can impact the profitability of trade centers, which would be very cool. Just like in EU5, if you remember, there is a thing like port advantage where they decrease the ship building time, which I think it's a very great idea if they implement this. Trading in trade centers appears autonomously, with a number of weekly adjustments based on the weekly trades value created by the trade centers, in which they will increase or decrease trade volumes to create profit for themselves. While this process is automatic and autonomous, it's not completely out of player hands, as you can heavily influence the trade centers through tariffs and subventions. But more on that a little bit. Unlike in the old system, trade centers are not reliant on convoys or any other government produced resource. Instead, they purchase merchant marine, a new type of good created by ports, which are no longer government only buildings. Right now, the amount of merchant marine consumed by trade centers is static by level, but we are looking into making it dependent on geographic distance to trade partners. As an additional note, both trade centers and ports can now be constructed, privatized, owned by ownership. So exactly what I said, like if the trade centers can be built by private section, it will feel natural. The building of it and the economical output so very nice. So world market location. Switching to talk about the world market itself, you might as well ask, so where the world market is located? Conceptually, what we say to this is the world market exists in sea. In other words, once you have access to the sea, you also have the ability to trade on the world market, though of course, it's a bit more complicated than that. To explain in more detail, I first had to tell you about something in which already exists in the game, but is presently quite hidden: market areas. Market areas are chunks of a market consisting of a number of states that are all connected by land or by strait. To give you an example, the Spanish market has several markets area, one for Spain itself, one for Cuba, one for Puerto Rico, and another for the Philippines, and so on. Prussia, conversely, has only a single market area which contains not only Prussia, but all of the states, the countries in the Zollverein. So this is basically when you hover your mouse over the convoys, you can see some amount of convoys being wasted on like internal market, national market, something like it. I am assuming that that is it. Like it's the amount of convoys that's needed to transport the goods between those market areas. In order to trade with world markets, a market area must have at least one port, at which point a world market hub will be established. When there are multiple ports in market area, the hub is chosen based on factors such as port level and state GDP. Hubs are not completely static, but do not generally move around unless a much more suitable candidate state emerges to eclipse the old hub state. Now the question is, any state that's within a market area which has a world market hub can trade with the world market. Okay, but the good come out of this state itself, or it need to go to the world market hub in order to after go to the world market? So basically, let's take the example of Spanish market. If I produce a good in Catalonia, it goes to the Western Andalusia, and from there they sell to the world market. Because if it's true, the profit of selling a good that was produced in Catalonia would stay in Western Andalusia, right? And if it's not true, the state which has the world market hub will grab a kind of bonus from like a bigger profit because that would make sense, right? Landlocked countries, however, are not left out completely in the cold when it comes to world market. Aside from being able to utilize national trade deals, which I said before we are not covering today, they can also negotiate transit rights with a foreign nation in order to be able to trade through the world market hubs. For example, Switzerland could negotiate transit rights with Austria to be able to trade through Venetia, or with Prussia to be able to trade through one of the German ports. We will return to talk more about the World Markets Hub in later development diaries when we cover subjects such as blockades, but for now, we should continue. I will add as a final note that one design problem we have currently identified with world market hubs and market areas is that it doesn't make too much sense for huge market areas, such as Russia, to only have a single hub, and this is something we're currently exploring solutions for. Well, it's another thing to compute, but they could make like U5, where like each state calculate which market area it has more advantage being on, and using this to split these market areas into more areas. Or maybe another easier solution is just use these trade nodes, which the military already use it in order to move around the world. But let's see. But a question that came to my mind is that, okay, Landlocked countries shouldn't have access to the world market. This is a cool feature that they would suffer without having access with it. But let's use the same example as them, Switzerland. They can't trade with the US as an example, but they should be able to trade with France, Prussia, Austria, and the countries that border them, right? Because in my opinion, it seems like landlocked countries can only trade with the government trade agreements, without having it autonomously. So this is kind of strange. I hope that they clarify this later, but a landlocked country should still be able to commercialize with its neighbors. While the world market exists in the sea, that doesn't mean that we simply ignore where your exports are going as soon as they get loaded onto a ship. Not all trade partners are equal, and it makes little sense to get the bulk of your clothes imports from an overseas partner if your demand could be met by a closer source. As such, each trade center has a preference weight for every other trade center based on factors such as interest relations, diplomatic agreements, and of course, geographic distance, and will trade more with higher weight trade centers and less with lower weight ones. And although this is pretty good, since we are talking about Victoria 3, it already starts to become a little bit more concerning due to performance issues. Like with this trade rework, I hope that they would fix somehow the performance issue with trade, but it seems that it's just getting more complicated because like what I thought is that from a player perspective, it tends to impact more the performance of the game because more trade will be done. But if we remember that most of the countries are AI driven, these calculations are already done. So the British AI already calculates which route is more profitable, and they do it for each good for each country. And my hope was that they would only check the world market price and then it would be one single calculation for each good, which would increase performance a lot. But let's see how this dev diary continues because it's starting to be a little bit concerning. Trade advantage. I have mentioned trade advantage at several points during this development diary, so I figure it's high time I explain it to you. I already explained that there is a world market price for each good, which is high when import exceeds export, and low when export exceeds import, and which is compared to the state price when determining how much profit a trade center can extract from its trade. However, this is a bit of simplification. The world market price is the average price for imported slash exported goods, while the actual price is modified by trade center relative trade advantage to its competitors. Trade advantage is calculated for each trade center for each good in each direction. So more things to be calculated. The developers need to be aware of what they're doing right here because I'm really worried right now. As an example, a trade center in Lancashire will have a certain amount of trade advantage for exporting fabric, which will be different from its trade advantage in exporting coal, and also different from its trade advantage for importing either fabric or coal. Trade advantage is multiplied by the amount of trade units and then compared to the trade advantage of all other trade centers trading the same goods in the same direction. The higher a trade center's share of a global trade advantage compared to its share of global trade volume, the higher its relative advantage, which in turn translates into a better price. Advantage is a zero-sum game. The average price on imports slash exports is always equal to the world market price. So any improvement on prices a trade center gains always comes at the expense of its competitors, which is very interesting and can create some tensions between countries. Let's see how the AI will handle this. After reading the whole paragraph, I think I understood how it works. So basically, each trade center will calculate the profitability of selling a good to the world market, comparing the local price to the world market price. So less calculations. While that, it will calculate the advantage of that trade center relatively to the trade goods and to the direction that it's trading. So it's more light than I expected, And this may be even lighter than the calculations that are done in the present version. Like, I think that every update paradox making the close future needs to be aware about increasing the performance of the game. If that explanation sounds confusing, the key takeaway is that higher advantage equals better prices, and in turn, the ability to capture a larger share of the global trade. Advantage is gained from a variety of factors, such as trade center levels, interest in relevant market and trade agreements. Regional economics also have a play role. The higher the market area's share of global production, the higher its export advantage, and vice versa for consumption slash import advantage. So this trade advantage is a much more specialized and flavorful version of what prestige used to be in Wiki 2. Because if you remember the global market from Wiki 2, the more prestige you had as a country, the upper you would be in the countries list. And this countries list would determine who would get the goods first, interacting with the world market. Changing the focus of the discussion a little bit, something I felt I have not always made it clear in the past when we changed the system toward in a more autonomous slash automatic way is how you are expected to interact with it. Under the old trade route system, this was clear enough. You, as the player, were the sole arbiter of trade for your country for ill or good. In the new system, and I will remind you again that I'm only talking about the world market here, of country to country trade deals, which we will cover in a later diary, you are expected to make strategic level decisions to capture global import and export shares. These country to country trade deals actually remind me about stockpiles because, like, okay, I'm gonna do a trade with another country, but from where I'm taking this good, maybe from my country stockpile, which is something that the community has always asked for. So let's keep an eye on it. As an example, playing as Sweden, you have a lot of potential to produce iron, far more than you could ever use domestically with your limited starting population. A natural course of action then might be able to build your trade capacity and try to maximize your trade advantage for exporting iron, leading to greater export volumes and in turn creating favorable conditions for expanding your iron production. The maximization of trade advantage can be done in a number of ways. For example, by signing trade agreement with key importers or by squeezing the competition by unequal treaties on them. More on that particular point later. For now, it will remain mysteriously unelaborated on. And this is very interesting that they are paying attention to this because there is a very big problem of creating like bananas republic in Victoria Free right now because you naturally will tend to go to industrialist society. Like there is nothing you can do about it. And one of the reasons that this happened is that in the very early game or mid game, the rural goods start to become a very, very cheap. So like if you start as a South American country, you easily overproduce coffee, sugar, meat, and this type of goods because you are not able to export. And now that they are saying here that Sweden can mainly focus on exporting iron, this is the same for like South American countries or African countries that want to specialize in creating coffee economies, banana economies. So this is very interesting and very cool play style because the opposite is also true. Because as it seems, in order to be a more productive rural society, you won't necessarily need to build some tooling workshops. You will be able to just import them from the world market. Another key tool in your strategic trade arsenal is tariffs and their newly introduced counterpart, subventions. Tariffs are, of course, already in the game, but now become much more important as they are the principal way by which you can directly influence the decision made by your trade centers. Where previously tariffs for a particular good could only be set to import focus, export focus, or no focus, import and export tariff levels are now set separately, meaning that you can throw up tariff barriers in both directions if you're feeling particularly protectionist about a good. There is, just as before, collective fee from your trade centers for each good of the relevant type exported slash imported. and so effectively serve to reduce trade volumes of that good by making it less profitable to trade. Subventions function in the exact opposite way, paying the trade senders a certain amount of money for each unit traded in the directed direction, and can be used on a variety of ways, such as subsidizing a critical import of military goods or muscle out the competition for one of your principal exports. So something interesting that you can do is like when you start producing cars, as an example, if you make a very optimal run, you're probably gonna start to produce one, two, up to 5,000 cars, while no one other than you is already producing cars. So you maybe can monopolize the world market of cars and then put a ton of tariffs to essentially be picking taxes from all over the world. So very interesting this. All right, I think that should suffice to give you an overview of the world market. I do want to emphasize that this feature is still under development and there are some key questions we have not figured it out, such as the issues with over large market areas. Before I sign off, I will leave you with a couple of screenshots from Endgame World Market in the current build. Okay, so a lot of trade going on, which is nice, but we need to remember that this is 1936, I guess. So it probably should have a little bit more, but okay. But at least we doesn't have like a very overvaluated good, which means that the AI is actually building it. So maybe the AI is better at doing economics. And we also see the British market having almost half of the exports in the whole world, which is expected. And Belgium played very, very tall, as we can see, because it can be a super productive market, but most of the times they will lack the goods, which is a very great sign to see because the Belgian market has a lot of potential nowadays, but they just can't grow because they can't trade. And now with this simulation, they actually managed to do it and increase a lot by size. So very, very good and very interesting. But now something interesting that it didn't happen is that Sweden are not exporting iron as they said. So like either the AI couldn't manage to do it or the system is not great enough for Sweden to do that, which is kind of concerning. But overall, it seems very good. That's all for now. However, we'll be back just a few days on Monday, March 31st to talk about the expansion pass and what's coming next for Victoria Free. Talking about embargoes and how they will work, they say that embargoes should penalize the target relative to how much of global trade volumes you control. But I don't know if it means that it will decrease their trade advantage, let's say, or like if I export 1,000 of coal goods, as they use in an example, the country that received the embargo won't have access to at least 1,000 of the global market. We need to see how that goes, but I think it's one of these two options. Going out of topic, the comments here say about the train, and they say they want to rework the logistics system in a similar way to the trade rework, maybe like a HOI 4, but they don't have time to do it in 1.9. So maybe I'm guessing 1.12 or 1.13 because in 1.10 or 1.11, I think that they will change something about cultures and military. So maybe they will delay it to 2026. One important comment talking about performance is from random guy. How does this new system compare in performance from the older system? And he says here that at the moment, according to our internal tools, it is slightly more performant than the old system, which is huge because it seems that they managed to improve the system by a ton while actually making it faster. Of course, we need to wait to test. As he says here, is that they can't promise that it will stay on release and it will be the same for everyone. But maybe is what I said that the calculations are not done from each country to each country, but rather from each guild to the world market, which decrease a lot the calculations to be done. And here he says that all trade with the world market is naval trade. Now, I don't know if it means that a landlocked country can't autonomous trade with its neighbors, or if only the world market is through naval trade, and there will be another system to land trade. So interesting thing about migration is that the mass migration target now it's unlocked by a sufficiently large world market trade volume between two countries. So it's an interesting thing to know because nowadays the trade centers they give some migration attraction. So this is how they're handling it. So this was the dev diary, a very important dev diary that I think that will change a lot how the game is played because the main gear of the game is the economy and trade is one of the most important part of the economy. So it will probably be a huge twist to the game situation and let's hope that it also increase performance to make it more enjoyable to play. So I hope I helped you to understand this depth diary and contributed with my own ideas. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I see you next time.